Welcome to NYSUT. We're in Latham, New York, Capital Region. Is our beautiful building, built in 2002 with all union labor. Let's go inside. We have a couple of hundred great staff working in this building, providing services to our members. We dedicate this building to the builders of NYSUT, the people who brought it together from around the state, like Tom Hobart, traveling around making sure that everyone felt a part of the organization from the very beginning. Albert Schenker, everybody remembers, one of the founders, the leaders who brought NYSUT together. So many people here, they have really dedicated their lives to making sure that their voices are heard, that members' voices are heard. These are the people who set us in motion to be the most powerful union in New York. From BTF in Buffalo to the North Country to Central New York, New York City. 50 years ago, 0 members. Today, we're talking about a union of 680,000 members. We are gigantic, we are powerful. Think how far we've come. We have really come a long way.
The roots of our union go back to 1845, when 185 teachers and administrators from across the state convened for the first time in a church in Syracuse. Like today, teachers advocated for students and for better working conditions. But their interests generally took a back seat to those of administrators who dominated local educational associations.
Almost all the history, administrators were the presidents of the associations. There were some principals that were, really in the forefront of us, but not many.
The administrators were primarily male. Teachers were primarily female. It was a very paternalistic world, and it was looked upon as a second income profession.
One of my social studies teachers was hired in the 1930s during the Depression. In February, the school board told him that they couldn't pay him anymore. They would like him to stay, but they couldn't pay him. She stayed. God bless her.
Life in America has changed. It has created more jobs for more people, and all continue to profit from it in ever new ways.
The post-war era, workers enjoyed incredible prosperity, all workers except for teachers.
Adding insult to the injury of bad pay, which in many places was less than $2,000 a year, teachers lacked control over nearly every aspect of their jobs, right down to the clothes they wore.
When I started teaching, the women were all either in dresses or skirts. You would be into insubordination if you didn't. We didn't have shared decision-making. You did what the principal told you to do.
There was an administrator in the western part of the state, asked a home economics teacher to make him homemade muffins. He liked her homemade muffins. And when she declined, she was warned that she was insubordinate. She was a non-tenured teacher. She had no protection. And she was let go because she refused to make muffins for the principal of her building.
Everything was out of your hands. The administration controlled everything. My name is Charlotte Laporte. My first teaching experience was in 1961. I was married the previous August, and then in September, I found out that I was pregnant. When I sat down to tell the principal that I was pregnant, he said to me, "You know the policy is that you have to leave as soon as you start showing." And I said, "No, I didn't know that, Mr. Perry." My husband was still in college, and to think that we would have no income was devastating. The particular school that I was assigned to was one that they had a very difficult time staffing. And he said to me, "I want you to stay as long as possible. We will work around it." What he meant was that when someone came in, that he would find a place to hide me in the building. One time I had to hide in the teacher's cloakroom. Another time, they hid me in actually a closet. I would go home and just cry. But because we needed the income, I needed to continue. It was very, very hard for me to just absorb all of this and wonder, how can this be possible? You were really at the mercy of the Board of Education. Your salary, your working conditions, everything was controlled by the board. There was no organization to protect the teacher. Whatever happened, and you had to accept it.
Be good. Be obedient. Keep your mouth shut. Don't rock the boat. Don't do anything against the administration. Behave. This is not a school, it's a military establishment. I am the general. If you don't listen to my orders, you're going to be court-martialed.
In New York City, a math teacher from Queens named Albert Shanker was preaching a new message. You don't have to accept it.
Now that word professional is becoming to be more and more of a dirty word for teachers. It is a word with which the administrator uses when he turns around anything which he doesn't like the teacher is doing. He says, you are not being professional. Be good.
A mesmerizing speaker, Shanker urged teachers to unite and fight back.
He had a presence when he came to the microphone, which commanded people's attention, and he had a vision of where the profession was going.
Shanker was the son of a union garment worker, and his vision was for teachers to move beyond the passive professional associations common across the state.
What he did was in the tradition of the American labor movement. Al Shanker got members to unionize and to fight for their rights.
The United Federation of Teachers, the UFT, formed in 1960, went on strike that same year and won collective bargaining rights for all of New York City. A strike in '67 led to a 20% pay raise and landed a defiant Shanker in jail.
What do you think that you've proved by your stay in prison? I wasn't trying to prove anything. I didn't ask them to send me here. But I think what has been proven is that teachers are not going to give up their fight for professional dignity, and they're not going to give up the fight for good schools. And if this is the price that we have to pay for it periodically, then that price is going to be paid.
UFT would strike 4 times in the 1960s.
I started in February of '67, and in the following September, we were on strike. I started teaching at $5,200, and it moved up pretty quickly. Class size was nailed down through our contracts. 1 period a day off. There was always something we were doing to try to improve the job. So the job changed.
Teaching had entered a new era in New York City, and Shanker had become so famous, he was used as a punchline in a Hollywood film.
What happened to everybody? Where are all my friends?
You are now in the year 2173. Now, this is the central parallel of the American Federation. That was before it was destroyed by the war.
War?
Yes, according to history, over 100 years ago, a man named Albert Shanker got a hold of a nuclear warhead.
He got hold of the bomb. That was great. In our office, everybody was furious, except Al Shanker. He said, why? Why these things are not important, and they never got to him. He was laughing.
I kind of took it as a union leader. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I did a little bit of praise that maybe we have established ourselves as somebody we have to deal with.
While teachers like Joe McLaughlin looked up to Shanker, others, especially those outside of New York City, viewed him with suspicion.
There was a feeling that we were upstate and they were downstate, and there was a great division, upstate versus downstate. Oh, they have their issues and we have ours, as ne'er the twain shall meet. There was, of course, all kinds of myths about Shanker. He was a communist, or he's this aggressive, obnoxious New York City type who's going to wreck us all because he has no respect for, the hierarchy.
Mixed feelings about Shanker reflected a bigger split among teachers over whether they belonged in unions at all.
People connoted unionism with those kinds of backroom politics and nasty strategies that they saw in the movies.
Members in my area were very frightened. We felt we were a profession, we were not a union, and we were terrified of union tactics. The word strike and union were bad words.
Attitudes would begin to change in 1967 with the passage of a new law.
Governor Rockefeller proposed a series of bills called the Taylor Law, which gave teachers the right to bargain collectively. I was a fairly new teacher, no tenure, sitting in a faculty meeting run by the principal, and it always ended with his giving 10 minutes to the Teachers Association president, who began to explain the new law that was recently passed. And he said one of the provisions of this new law was that we were to put together a bargaining committee. And this bargaining committee would bargain terms and conditions of employment. Would there be any volunteers that would be willing to sit? Nobody's hand went up. I didn't know what terms and conditions really meant. But I raised my hand, and a veteran teacher who was kind of like a mentor to me said, "Put your hand up." The president of the Teacher Association said, "Thank you, Mr. Bufaro. I'll get you some more information on what we have to do." With that, the meeting was adjourned. People got in their cars, went home. The very next morning, I was teaching. There was a knock at my door. It was the high school principal's secretary. She said, "The superintendent would like to see you in his office." So I puffed up. I thought, well, see, this is a collective bargaining thing is really, it's going to be something. You know, he wants to get started now in talking about terms and conditions. So I said, okay, I gave the class some work. And I went down to the superintendent's office, and he said, "Mr. Bufaro, I understand that you have volunteered to be the chairperson of the collective bargaining committee." And I said, "Yeah, well, nobody else wants to volunteer. It's a dirty job, but somebody has to do," words of that effect, thinking we were having a friendly conversation. He said, "On my desk, I have 2 letters," and he put his hand on one and another hand on another, and he said, "One letter is a letter of resignation as chairman of the negotiating committee. And the second letter here is a letter of resignation from the district. You have until 2:30 this afternoon to choose which letter you're going to sign." Well, I was taken aback. I said, "I'm not going to sign either." I said, "Are you threatening me?" He said, "No, it's a reality. I'm giving you a choice." I went down to the faculty room, was grabbing a cup of coffee, really shaken, and a friend of mine, a colleague, said to me, "What's wrong?" And I explained what happened, and he said, "He threatened you." And I said, "Well, that's the way I interpret it." And he said, "Who else is on the committee?" And I said, "Well, nobody." He said, "Yeah, I'll serve. I'll serve." He began to tell my story to others as they came into the faculty room. And at the end of the day, 18 of us went into the superintendent's office, and we said, and they said, "There will be no letter signing today. We are the bargaining team." Thus, little to my knowledge, we had formed a union. We were flying by the seat of our pants. We didn't know what this law meant to us. We didn't know our rights and privileges. We knew that we had something new. We knew the profession now was changing.
We organized quite quickly, as I think most other local associations did.
The first Buffalo contract was the example that we shipped out to all the other locals in the state. And they all used that.
We had training sessions and were well prepared. And I think in most upstate locals, the local associations then did quite well because, at least in my experiences, the school boards and the superintendents were not well prepared.
While teachers were having success at the negotiating table, a surprise attack was being hatched at the state capitol.
In 1971, the New York State Legislature was in the process of passing a budget. They didn't have enough votes. Charles Jerebeck, Conservative Party member, decided on the middle of the night that in order to vote for the budget, he was going to ask the Republicans to include anti-teacher bills that were passed with no one even knowing they were coming. This became known as Sordid Friday. Jerebick thought it would be good politics to attack teachers, and he expected no repercussions. And by the way, based on the past history of what teachers did in politics, he was probably right. Teachers were either not interested in politics, didn't think we should be in politics, had their own politics, and were not interested in what the union was telling them to do. 1970 vote campaign was our only experience with raising money. We collected a total of $7,000 for the whole entire state. Jerebick, the one thing he did wrong was to pass a bill changing tenure, and that really motivates teachers. Instead of getting tenure in 3 years, you have to wait 5 years. We had a big rally. That was going to be an indicator of whether we were going to go from $7,000 to something real. 4,000 people show up, and they were passing the hat. We collected more money in about 5 minutes than we collected the whole entire year in 1970. By the time we got into 1972, we had collected $600,000. That was the drive that put us in business. My strategy was to convince the town leader that he didn't want Jerebick. I called 3 or 4 times. Then he found out we had money. He called me back. I went over there thinking I was only going to meet with the county chairman, and I walked into a room full of people from all over Suffolk County. I handed out the list of locals and how much money we contributed, and the whole room went silent. It was incredible. I said, this guy Jerebick has really aggravated our members. And the guy says, I guess so. I went up to Albany. Jerebick was coming down the hall. I get in the elevator. As the elevator starts, Jerebick says, which one of you guys is Costello? And I go, uh-oh. He starts screaming. Told me I was intimidating town leaders. I thought I was dead. He said, you'll be sorry you ever did this. You'll be sorry you ever did this. Jerebick wasn't given the nomination.
Without the nomination from the local Republican Party, Jerebick was beaten badly in the 1972 election and faded into obscurity. He had made clear to teachers that politics mattered, and there were renewed calls for all the state's teachers, upstate and downstate, unionists and professionals, to join forces.
Jerebick was the match that lit the fire, I think, that got people saying, we need to be together so that we can build power.
At the time, the Shanker-led United Teachers of New York, UTNY, which was affiliated with the trade union federation AFL-CIO, had locals in New York City, parts of Long Island, Yonkers, and Schenectady. The New York State Teachers Association, NYSTA, led by Tom Hobart, covered most of the rest of the state and was affiliated with the professional-minded National Education Association, the NEA.
Al Shanker and Tom Hobart came together in discussions in Albany at the University Club to discuss how to bring the organizations together, how to meld the professional and the union in order to demonstrate the political strength of unity.
The big issue was AFL-CIO affiliation. And we all said, we weren't gonna do that.
NEA President Catherine Barrett was adamantly opposed to the merger and especially to the idea that one of her state chapters would join the AFL-CIO. Little did she know that a group of NYSTA officers had already warmed to the idea.
Tony Cortese and Ed Rogers. Ed was the first vice president, Tony was the second vice president. They were very much in favor of it, very much more than I was. I was for merger, but not at any cost. They were saying, yeah, stop the bullshit, you know. I had a communication director, Ned Hopkins, and the newspaper came out, and there was a question and answer with Tom Hobart, in which I justified AFL-CIO affiliation. I didn't know about it beforehand. He did it on his own. So the NEA was very upset with me. I got summoned to Washington, and Charles, who was the chauffeur driver, picked me up at the airport, took me to meet with Catherine Barrett, and Catherine said, just tell me, Ned did this and you didn't have any part of it. Now, I'm president of the organization. I'm not going to say that I didn't have any part of what went on in the organization, right? And I said, no, that's all right. That's the way I feel. So she closed up her folder and walked out. I said, Catherine, is Charles available to take me to the airport? She said, no.
While Tom looked for a ride to the airport, Ned Hopkins was plotting another surprise, this time for NYSTA's annual convention, where a vote on the merger was planned.
Ned Hopkins, he said, call on Paul Cole to make the motion to merge. I said, oh, he's not going to do that. Ned said, yes, he will.
On April 21st, 1972, 127 years after teachers had gathered in central New York to create the first state association, and with the question of merger still unsettled, hundreds of delegates arrived in the Catskills for what would be the most consequential meeting of teachers in New York State history. Among them was Paul Cole, who had kept his plan to formally propose the merger a secret.
I thought I could have more of an impact because it would surprise people. They expect me to be against it because of my closeness to Catherine Barrett.
Cole had managed Barrett's run for the NEA presidency and was seen as a rival to Tom Hobart. After a day of speeches and debates, Hobart, as instructed by Hopkins, called on Cole.
The microphone was in the right rear of the hall. When I moved to the microphone, everybody said, aha, this is Catherine Barrett's former campaign manager, a guy who can get this voted down and defeat a major initiative of Tom Hobart and eventually become the next president of the New York State Teachers Association. I understand why people said that, but I had no doubts that there was a need to unify the teachers in the state.
I hereby move that the convention approve the proposal.
There was a gasp when Paul made the motion because the people that were opposed thought of Paul as their leader.
Convention approved the proposal to merge the New York State Teachers Association and that it be ratified by a vote of the membership.
And thus, NYSUT was born. Born, but still a fledgling. To get the organization up on its feet, Hobart and Vice President Tony Cortese embarked on a dizzying sales campaign.
All of the affiliates had to vote in. And I had to go out, and Tony had to go out and sell them.
We would go to Olean and have a meeting, and then stop maybe in Syracuse, and then go up to the North Country, Plattsburgh, Malone, 12 o'clock, sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning, our day was done.
There were some 1,100 locals to visit, and attacks from opponents of the merger to fend off.
I went to meetings I wasn't even invited to. In Western New York, there was a gentleman, he had a chair up on the stage, so I just picked up a chair and I went up on the stage. I was appealing to their sense of what could be and the fact that unity brings us strength. I think people started to believe in something bigger than their little closed group, and that there was truly an advantage to be part of an organization that represented the whole state.
NYSUT members would lean on their new union in the years ahead when school districts went on the offensive at the bargaining table.
We got our first good contract in the early 70s. We were all elated.
But there became a public outcry through the boards of education, and the battle began to take away some of the newfound privilege.
At the time, once a contract expired, districts were free to dictate terms until a new contract could be negotiated, incentivizing school boards to drag their feet.
We had a Board of Education at that time that just kept stalling and resisting.
The position of the school district was that you don't have a contract, you are out of a contract, so you will take only what we will say.
Our back was against the wall if we wanted to continue to improve teaching.
65 locals went on strike throughout the state. Taylor law said that the teachers, if they went on strike, they would lose 2 days' pay for every day they were out.
It's more than just 2 days' pay, because when you lose a day's pay, you lose $100. But when you're fined, you still lose the $100, but they take the tax out first.
We were out from the second week in September till the week of Thanksgiving. We didn't get a paycheck until March.
NYSUT did make interest-free loans available, which helped a great deal. That was an important lesson in the power of unions in doing what was necessary to help members.
Affiliates across the state sent Christmas and Hanukkah presents for the children of the teachers that had been on strike. I had 2 very young children, and to see these presents pour in from across the state was so heartwarming.
It brought this large state of New York, I think, to the realization that it doesn't matter where you live, we're all in this together.
Support that we got from the other locals was phenomenal. And they were at the picket line every morning, every night.
You would go to North Syracuse at 5 o'clock, Rome at 6:30.
It caused a fantastic sense of brotherhood and sisterhood and pride.
We laid the groundwork for the future generations. There's no doubt about it.
The strikers paid a heavy price, including jail time for more than 100 of them. But they changed the course of education across the state.
The strike was the turning point. After that, we were a force to be reckoned with.
We had no power until we went on strike. And then the district understood the power of the union.
Locals would use that power to negotiate contracts that are still benefiting students and teachers today.
We know about the wages and benefits of which we're all pleased, but if you look at what was on the table, so much of that was of direct benefit for students. Smaller classes, additional psychological services, additional resources for children who are struggling.
We were a school district of 6 buildings. That strike brought everybody together. And I remember the conversations with that superintendent after the strike. I said, we now have a unified district. Let's use that unity to create a good school district. And we did.
I had the opportunity to be at the amazing Keep the Clock convention where Al Shanker made his very famous Keep the Clock speech, which was about the need for unity in very, very difficult times.
Some former NEA locals were unhappy with NYSUT's militant leadership, and they wanted to go back to being professional associations.
There was a movement to disband NYSUT, and I could remember going through the night in discussions and shouting matches about what to do.
Some locals were sure to leave, but how many? And how many others would follow their lead?
I remember looking to Al, because he was the key. Al was the key.
He came to the podium and made one of the most amazing speeches in the history of the New York State United Teachers.
There is only one real issue, and that is whether you're going to have an organization at all. I'm not talking unionism. I'm not talking professional association. I'm talking about the jobs of your members.
What you would see in a speech that he would do is you would actually see his thinking process.
The NEA cannot build a united organization in this state. They can destroy, they can weaken, they can hurt the majority. That's all.
He really was an artist.
One evening, I was reading a magazine, and I ran into a story by Hans Christian Andersen called The Most Unbelievable Thing. There was a kingdom, and in the kingdom there was a king, and he was interested in progress and who could accomplish the most unbelievable thing. There were many marvelous things, but towering above was a truly wonderful clock, sculpted with the leading intellectual and spiritual figures of the history of mankind. The judges were about to pronounce it the winner when a competitor appeared. He carried something in his hand, but it was not a work of art. It was a hammer. He walked up to the clock and he smashed it. And everyone thought, why, to smash up such a clock? Maybe that was the most unbelievable thing. The clock in the story, like all great works of art, is frail and fragile. Our organization is a wonderful work of art. It has been put together. If destroyed, it will never be put together again. To each of us goes the responsibility to see that it is the clock that survives and not the hammer.
When the dust settled, 664 of 700 locals had chosen to remain in NYSUT.
I used to tell my secretary, if Al calls, give me a couple of minutes to compose myself, because he's going to tell me that it'd be a good idea to do something that means it's going to double my workload.
For Shanker, holding on to NYSUT's current members wasn't enough. He wanted to bring others into the fold, an idea that would appeal to Hobart and his staff, notwithstanding the extra work.
If there's somebody out there whose working conditions we can help improve, then we should be doing it.
Thinking of a union is that we should help all workers.
Paraprofessionals or teacher's aides have been first. In 1969, Shanker had invited them into the UFT.
He was so adamant about it. It meant a lot to see that. In that first contract, we had paid vacation, holidays, we had everything that the teachers had, we got.
For their second contract, with UFT threatening strike, paraprofessionals want a whopping 140% increase to their pay and benefits, including free college tuition.
Ever since then, we have been building and building. If it hadn't been for the union, we would not be here today, and I'm representing 30,000 paraprofessionals.
Any good you secure for yourself is not really secure unless it's there for all. And so in a most basic sense, we're in it together.
For 5 decades, PSC has represented faculty and staff in New York City's public university system.
Unions are always battling, right? Or we wouldn't need them. So yes, it's exhausting, but it's also exhilarating. And the relationships you make with people in struggle are like no other.
We were only allowed to have professional associations, and they were not effective at the bargaining table. And we interviewed the heads of every union in New York City, and no one did it better than the UFT.
In 1979, with help from the UFT and NYSUT, Goldman and her colleagues became the first private sector nursing local in the country.
We saw the strength that would be provided to us because we would be joining this largest of teacher unions.
NYSUT's second biggest local after the UFT, UUP represents 42,000 faculty and staff at SUNY colleges across the state.
governors, really starting with Mario Cuomo, aggressively came after the work that we do by slashing the SUNY budget. NYSUT really went to bat on behalf of UUP, directly confronting the governor and making sure that he understood that it wasn't just UUP standing alone in these fights. It was the hundreds of thousands of members of NYSUT and the political might of NYSUT that he would be taking on, and he relented.
NYSUT had become the biggest and most powerful union in New York State, but it hadn't won every battle. The locals that broke away at the 1976 convention, many had remained with NEA, and 4 decades later, the NEA and NYSUT were still fighting over districts.
We were wasting a lot of money because we were challenging each other in elections.
Over time, battles around the state grew even bloodier and uglier.
But you got to remember, they had 20 or 30,000 members, and we had 600,000. And whenever we got legislation like state aid, they benefited from it, but they didn't have a say in it.
They just didn't have enough power. And I think they saw where the power was and finally said, well, let's go with the power.
That's what initiated the conversations starting in 2004. I remember several of those meetings. They'd be shouting across the table. We'd have to break up and go into separate rooms in order to cool down before we came back into the room.
4 decades of disputes were ironed out over the next 18 months, and by 2006, NEA was ready to return to the NYSUT fold.
There was a need to have a constitution that would be passed by both NEA New York and NYSUT. And what was critical was that Constitution had to be passed without amendment. If either representative assembly attempted to amend the Constitution, there wouldn't be a merger.
Of course, we did everything we possibly could to make them welcome.
160 years after New York's first educational association had been formed, the dream of uniting New York State's teachers in a single organization would finally be realized.
When it was finally done, it was a significant day for all of us.
It was a very emotional moment to bring the largest merger in the country along and to create what effectively was now the largest state federation in the country. It was really a very special moment.
Amidst all of the challenges to build and keep the union together, NYSUT has always been there for New York students and communities.
September 11th, we were handing out flyers in Brooklyn for the union when all of a sudden a plane goes into the World Trade Center. This picture is Tom and I talking about what just happened. My face is completely ashen.
New York streets are like canyons with buildings. And as I was standing there, I looked down and I saw this plane, which I presume was a U.S. military plane, bank like this.
We walked over to the Brooklyn Promenade and we watched the buildings burn. And it was a blue sky. So you could see papers starting to waft through the air.
It was almost like gigantic snowflakes, all coming down.
And we watched the building crumble. We stood there and just watched.
These folks started coming up out of the subway station from Manhattan, some covered in ash, fully covered in ash.
We spent the whole day at 110 Livingston Street with then Chancellor Harold Levy, trying to get kids out safely and trying to get kids home. We did not lose a kid that day. There's no manual for what happens if you're downtown and, all of a sudden a plane goes into the World Trade Center, and those teachers, they were amazing.
Having done what we did after this incident in 9/11, we had a sense that we had obligations beyond what we normally do.
20 years after 9/11, NYSUT members across the state would go above and beyond during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Because of state and federal regulations, our food service workers needed to remain in person and on the front lines from day one of COVID.
We were told that kids had to get fed breakfast and lunch. Our SRPs came in. Our sentries delivered food. Our bus drivers, we talk about 35,000 meals a day. It takes a toll.
We were faced with that instantly, as well as flipping over our in-person education to online.
Hi friends, how are you? I miss you all like crazy. Today I'm gonna read to you, If You Give a Moose a Muffin.
It was a stressful time, but people saw that the teachers cared about kids. We care about kids. We want to give them all that we've got. And we made a go of it.
I hope you enjoyed this story, and I hope you're having fun at home. I love you all.
It is the most incredible association of people in the country.
It's humbling. It's humbling to think that you're a piece of what has happened over the last 50 years.
The work that he did and the struggles, and not just Albert Schenker, but all of the people in that time period, the struggles that they went through and the hardships and the sacrifices they made, that makes it so that I can do what I do today. And the debt of gratitude that I just get a little choked up about this, but the debt of gratitude we have to Albert Schenker and to Alan Lubin and to the people who really started our movement in New York. It's moving, and it inspires me to not drop the torch.
When I meet with new teachers, when I give them the contract, I explain to them that an awful lot of blood, sweat, tears, struggle went into every word in that contract. And it didn't happen from the generosity of the district. So the union struggle has to continue.
In the 21st century, NYSUT's greatest struggles would be against political forces that threatened its members and shook the union to its core.
What does education, teachers or nurses, what do they have to do with politics? Why should politics be involved? It is the most important thing we do. In Albany, folks know they have to reckon with us. This is important.
Every 20 years, the legislature and the people decide whether or not to open up the New York State Constitution.
We wanted to make sure people were informed that this may sound like a good thing, but here are the details.
Both private and public union members, their pensions are protected by that Constitution. Opening up the Constitution is like opening up a can of worms, and you don't really know what's going to come out of it. 6 to 8 months ahead of time, most people said, oh yeah, you should just open it up.
The early polling showed that we were down. We were underwater. It was something like 40-60.
We had rallies, we had forums and panels.
We talked at local school board meetings, in community groups. I live in a small village, and we asked people to talk to their neighbors and make it a personal issue.
It was a moment of real, true unity.
We basically turned it completely around, and so by the time we got to that November vote,
it wasn't even close.
83% no and 17% yes.
It showed us that we can organize. We can organize, we can get people together, and when we do, we win.
We've had politicians who have really come strongly against us. Most of them are no longer in office. Andrew Cuomo was an emperor. One of his ways of making teachers' lives miserable was by having the state tell school districts how their teachers should be evaluated.
The evaluation of teachers became far more important than the teaching of children.
We had a right to have a professional voice about what we think is the best thing for the children that we're serving and the programs inside of our building. This is our profession, and it should be left to us to figure these things out.
I was getting frustrated. I said, we need to have a good old-fashioned union rally. You know, Katie barred the door, we're all getting up. I looked out in the auditorium, we had close to 4,000 people show up. So we invited Cuomo, and I would say, Governor Cuomo, are you here? And they wheeled out the cardboard cutout.
The call-out Cuomo rallies soon took on a life of their own.
If he was out on Long Island, they would line the avenues.
Orchard Park, Iroquois, Frontier, Buffalo, West Seneca.
He hated it. He really, really hated it.
The rallies culminated at Governor's Day at the State Fair, with NYSUT members arriving by the busload.
The governor comes in on Governor's Day every year.
I drove to Albany to get on the bus, and from there we took the bus up to Syracuse. We wanted to make sure that he knew that we were not going to back down.
We had about 1,000 members there, and Governor didn't go.
He did not come because he was afraid of teachers.
He couldn't go to Governor's Day at the State Fair because NYSUT was there.
It was probably one of the greatest experiences I've had as a union leader. We won that battle.
In order for NYSUT to remain strong, it's constantly trying to figure out how to keep this cacophony of different opinions and voices from different parts of the state, how to get them to understand what is their common ground and what is in their interests. That's the constant struggle, but that also is such a main thing that NYSUT has done to keep that unity in place.
That unity would face its most severe test in decades when the Supreme Court handed down its decision in the Janus case in 2018.
When the Supreme Court ruled in Janus that we would no longer be able to have dues automatically, and we would nobody had to stay in the union anymore, it was purely voluntary, we were told this is the end of the labor movement, the end of the union.
Our officers got together. We made it a point to get to every building in the district to meet with each and every individual.
Our reps were having one-to-one conversations in our buildings.
Everyone was speaking to someone, one person at a time.
We separated the cards in stacks of 10, so it was easy for the delegates to get to their 10 people. It was almost a race as to which building could get their cards in fastest. I had buildings that had 100% of their cards in by the end of the first day.
We were told that we could lose up to 10%, 20%.
Our own local, we were able to maintain 100%.
We had 100% stay.
Our local is at 100%.
We did not lose one member.
We were able to sign up over 1,400 of our members. We had 100% participation. It was some of the best union work that we've ever done. Through the 80s and the 90s, NYSUT really did become a beacon of strength for teachers and a political powerhouse. We got comfortable, and the Janus case really forced us to get uncomfortable with who we were and what we were doing, and that work is providing what I believe is the foundation for the next 50 years.
The first 50 years, building this great union, a statewide union with hundreds of thousands of members who believe and trust this union. The next 50 years, bringing in people who are marginalized, making sure that they feel comfortable in this union, how we can make life better for those in our state. That's been our goal. Now just building on that and making it even more apparent that the union movement, that NYSUT should have a role to play forever.